Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern on a Monday, and that means it's time for Content Chat. And today we're tackling a topic that some of you are probably a little surprised I'm talking about, because in general, I spend most of my time these days talking about tech, but I spent a decade at Charles Schwab creating content for a highly regulated industry. And that's why I'm excited to have my guest, Ann Marie Kahulec, here today to talk about just that. Because just because you have to get legal and compliance approval for things doesn't mean you should let yourself get away with creating boring content. Ann Marie, welcome to Content Chat.
Well, thank you, Erica. It's so good to be here this afternoon with you. I appreciate the invite.
Well, before we dive into our topic, I'd love it if you could just take a minute to introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, absolutely. Well, I've got about 25 years of digital marketing experience. And again, I've also worked in a lot of highly regulated fields, everything ranging from pet care to health and human services, healthcare in the digital space, cybersecurity, the tech space, and currently I work in the financial and banking and payments industry. It's very similar to what your background is with Charles Schwab.
Excellent.
Mhm.
So, for folks who maybe haven't heard the phrase before,
Mhm.
when we're talking about highly regulated industries, or say that an industry's content is highly regulated,
Mhm.
what does that mean, and what are the industries that largely applies to?
Well, that's a great question. And if we think about it, almost all industries have some sort of regulation to them, um, either copyright or consumer protection laws. And again, it varies from country to country, region to region. So when I'm talking about it, I'm focusing on industries that I've worked in primarily in the U.S. and or globally, and that have some sort of regional or government oversight. Again, it's more than just copyright. We're talking like actual consumer protection. We're talking like actual legal terms where a company, if you have to say certain things in either product descriptions, having legal disclaimers on the bottom of direct mail pieces, digital content on your website, etc. And that's specifically kind of what a company can and cannot say about what their product or solution can do. It's either consumer based or business to business, those lines to break it down. Now, the what my background again is like in pet care services, like veterinary services, pet care products, your flea and ticks, your dewormers, your shampoos, pet care, healthcare, human healthcare, in the cyberspace and cybersecurity as well as financial and banking and payment services. And so, in those kind of situations, again, there's government oversight, there's legal regulations, especially as you know, in the financial area and in the banking and personal finance, there is a lot of things that you have to just be aware of that you can and what you can and cannot say as a digital marketer.
And it is interesting because it's not a one size fits all fleece snuggly disclosure kind of blanket, because the things
Mhm.
that you have to disclose or terms that you need to avoid in healthcare or financial services or insurance are completely different from what you have to do in pharmaceuticals. Because even if you've never worked doing content marketing in pharmaceuticals, we've all seen the page long disclosure language that goes with their
Mhm.
advertising. And we've certainly, heard the sped up, one and a half speed disclosure language at the end of their commercials. But it goes beyond just what you can
Mhm.
do in an advertising setting, which I think people don't necessarily recognize. But
Absolutely.
there's some issues such as how in healthcare, you can't do a case study the way that you can do with a lot of other things because of HIPAA concerns. So I thought we
Mhm.
could maybe talk about some of those unique hurdles that you've seen in different industries that have impacted your approach to content marketing.
Absolutely. And you can even think about like the last time you went and saw a commercial or went for auto financing. Down at the bottom, I mean, they have that same, like on the little fine print on it. Again, it's not just pharmaceuticals or finance, but even it can be simple as a car loan. You go and look at that and say, this car is like 2% financing and da 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 da. All the credit card commercials that you see out there have all that sped up down at the bottom about interest rates and that sort of thing. Because again, it's a highly regulated industry. The government says you have to tell consumers what the interest rates are for these particular products and or services. So it's not just healthcare or pharmaceuticals. In fact, a great example is when I was working with a veterinary services company. My team, myself and another writer, were charged with creating product descriptions. Like you go on to Amazon and you type in flea and tick, right? And you're looking for a flea and tick product for your dog, right? Because I heard you had dogs. So, you're looking for that. And you're sitting there saying, okay, do I need a liquid? Do I need a pill? What's going to be easiest for my pet, right? So you go in and you find it in all of those different products that you bring up, you click on it, and you see that information underneath it. There's a writer behind all of that. It's not necessarily AI generated. And there's a whole process that you have to go through to write something as simple as 3 lines of, this is what this product is. You have your marketing speak. This is great. It kills fleas and ticks for up to 6 months. It's waterproof. They'll love you for it. And then the little video of the commercial, the person, saying, this is great. But underneath that, you then have all the chemicals listed, what actual fleas and ticks and other insects that it actually kills and or prevents infections or prevents other things, depending on the product or services. Even as simple as pet shampoo has all of that information. So there's somebody like me behind there writing all of that, then submitting that to a product marketer to make sure it's in line with our brand marketing. Then that person submits it over to a regulatory person to make sure that check marks all those boxes and say, yes, this product actually works for 6 months or 3 months. And then you go through the legal team just to make sure all that information is correct and it's checking all the boxes for consumer reports and consumer information. And then it gets out the door and it gets put on Amazon. So the next time you're looking for something like that or you're shopping online, you can think about the fact that there could be hundreds of hours that goes into just a simple product description in a heavily regulated industry. And you wouldn't think flea and tick products are something you pick up off the shelf, or you go into Walmart or you go into your local grocery store and there's a little package there that you look at it. There's designers, there's copywriters, there's a bunch of back-end information that goes into that.
It's true. And, in a way, the product copy is the easy part because there are really clear guidelines around, from an advertising perspective, what you can and cannot say. But when it comes to content marketing, where you're trying to create engaging editorial type content to really serve your audience, you end up with a whole nother set of hurdles because you have your legal team and your compliance team interpreting, okay, if we can't do these things in advertising, extrapolating that to, well, then we shouldn't really talk about this topic, or we need to make sure that none of our language is promissory. But so much of what content marketing is about is, helping your audience solve their problems. And if the language that you use has to be, qualified with the word help 50 times or may, might, could,
yes.
etc.
Could, there's certain words that I've learned to just kick out of my vocabulary. Could, should, and maybe, I always 3 to 4 week timelines. I mean, there's certain things that, yes, that's one of the greatest hurdles that you have. And is sitting there saying, okay, how can I make my content engaging? But one, not sound like it's repetitive over and over and over, saying those same words over and over and over again, because I got a list of words that are approved.
Yep.
Or second is the fact that you don't want to scare people. Like there are a lot of topics, especially now when we're talking about artificial intelligence and, cybersecurity. You're dealing in the finance and banking industry of, and breaches, security breaches, like what happened with United Healthcare. Yep. Or examples like for me, in the pet care situation, talking about like rabies. How do you educate your audience and provide engaging content without scaring them?
Right.
Or overwhelming them with so much data.
You have to tell them all of the potential negative, things. Otherwise, we could get sued because this seemed too rosy or too, too positive, too promissory. So it's tough because you want to create something interesting and good, but you can feel like you're constrained and that the dry, boring compliance to prove what
Oh,
everybody else is doing content is all
mhm.
you actually can get approval for.
Yeah,
And I
or are you constantly producing like this ebooks, infographics, overwhelming your audience? You can easily overwhelm your audience with data
yeah,
because you know you can use it because that's been approved. Our research shows insert stat. We know we do this insert stat or insert graphic, and it can be overwhelming. People can become noise blind if you overwhelm them with case study after case study, stat after stat, and that sort of thing. So you also have to be aware of the types of content you're producing in your campaigns to help support your overall brand message. And that's where working with subject matter experts come into play, your product marketers come into play. If you're the copywriter working with content strategists to say, okay, what do we have? What do we need to create? And how are we using it effectively over the campaign, whether the campaign is 1 month or seasonal, it's 3 months, or it's a year-long campaign. Because what we need in the right now, walking into summer, may be completely different on what we need during fall and winter, depending on what those industries are, who your target audience is, if you're involving like direct marketing campaigns, if you're going to conferences, how are you supporting the demand generation process and the sales enablement process? Because educating your consumer, educating your target audience is a little bit different than selling them on what the product does. So there's a definite difference between the two, and that can be a challenge as well. That can be a hurdle. What are you doing here? Are we educating, just doing basic education like frequently asked questions and guide pages? Because those can be just as important in your campaign as emails and direct marketing.
totally. And when you're in the situation where everyone is predisposed to just link to your own content and your own sources,
Mm-hmm.
then again, you have to remind people if you're doing actual content marketing, you're in service of the person consuming your content, and they have the expectation that you're going to have third party validation of your claims, that it's not just going to be your own data, your own experts.
Mm-hmm.
So in those situations, I found that it's really helpful to have that understanding of who your actual business partners are. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, on the B2B side at Schwab, we had a number of registered investment advisors with a good sized book of business, with us, or maybe who are on the advisory board. So then, okay, these are folks that we actually do business with. They have
Mm-hmm.
the same kinds of regulation as us. So those were things that we knew. All right, if they published a survey, or we could potentially quote it, or if they came out with a really interesting article, we might be able to link to it. So I think, unlike maybe some other kinds of businesses, you really, as a content marketer, have to get to know who all those people are that you have
Mm-hmm.
an actual legal business partnership with, because you're going to be so much more likely to get that approved to link to.
Absolutely. And also don't be afraid to check out your competition. In my career, I've always checked out I always ask for a list of who our competitors are in different spaces. Like
Mhm.
in banking and finance, it's a little bit differently than, like you said, in the insurance field compared to, the auto or biller space or the merchant retailer space. To sit there and say, or if I'm doing, consumers, if you're doing a consumer based product or services as a content marketer, I'm reading those reviews.
Yep.
I'm reading what people are saying because that's direct feedback on those descriptions, on those products. So then I can take that information, compile it, take it back to my product marketers and say, how can we adjust this? Let's get a meeting together and talk about with our legal team, our brand team, our regulatory team, our compliance team. What can we do to simplify the messaging? How are we marketing it? People are just not understanding it, or is it something with a formula where it's above and beyond as a marketer's control? But I also like the idea of checking out my competitors too, because again, you're looking at them and saying, oh, they're talking about X, Y, and Z. Let's see where they're turning. And also, this brings in a great conversation about search engine, SEO. It's like, what are they ranking on? What is
Yep.
my competition talking about? Are they using case studies? LinkedIn is also a great opportunity to check out your competition. As a writer, as a content creator, it's what are they talking about? Are they talking AI? Are they talking, cybersecurity? Are they talking, billing information, reconciliation? What are the hot topics that are top of mind for them? And see if we're also matching that. So I'm fortunate enough to work with an excellent agency and work with an excellent digital marketing team at my current role that does a lot of research for me and provides real-time feedback for me to
That's
sit there
awesome.
and say how the content's producing as a content strategist, as a content creator. And that way we can have weekly or monthly or quarterly meetings with product marketers, with our SMEs to sit there and say, okay, here's what's performing, here's what we're seeing, here's what we think we need to help fill in some of those informational gaps. So that way, and this is what our competitors are talking about, so that way we can stay ahead of the curve, but more importantly, stay focused on what we need to focus in on and not a lot of the outside noise. You got to trim it down and say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish in the next 6 months? Where is the company going? And that's where your brand guidelines come into play. That's where your executive leadership comes into play. They sit there and say, okay, here's what our focus is for the next 16 months, 18 months. And here's what we're going to need from you. And then once you get that information, it makes your job so much easier as a content creator to say, okay, we have a roadmap. We know where we're going. These are the topics they want to do. And here's some of the supplemental things that we can add in to help support that message while you're crafting the overall new product messaging or solution. So that way we're not rushing. Once you get us that overall brand message, we're not rushing to produce content to get it out there, along with like press releases and that sort of thing. It's what can we do to lead up to that successful product launch to make sure the public is aware or our customers are aware that this is coming.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that reminds me, of course, when you mentioned the 3 to 4 week timelines for things
Mm-hmm.
that, in a non highly regulated scenario, you could potentially turn around in a few days or a week.
Mm-hmm.
I had a number of managers in the time I was at Schwab, and I was also at United Behavioral Health, which
Mm.
was a United Healthcare subsidiary.
Oh yeah.
I had a bunch of different, folks because I reported into everybody from EVPs and CMOs
Mm-hmm.
to, executive to managing directors, and everyone had a different thought about how to handle that. And I remember I did have one manager who hated having to review all of my content and pushed really hard for me to get Series 7 and 62, I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
certified. And I pushed back really strongly because I'm like, I am not a I'm not a financial expert.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to necessarily spend my whole career in financial services. I was hired because I am an expert in content marketing and in
Mm-hmm.
making sure that we're doing the right things from a digital standpoint. So I'd love to hear your perspective on, when content marketers are in these industries, how do you kind of handle when somebody gets the bright idea that it'd be so much more efficient and effective for you to, get this industry certification so that way you can maybe bypass one of the review steps?
Well, for me, one, I have to ask them, what is that certification? What are two, how much time are you asking me to invest that's going to take away from actually producing content and the role that you hired me for as a content marketer or digital marketer or content strategist? Because I've had this happen to me before. I was hired as an email marketer and was told to get Marketo certification. And I'm like, what kind of support am I going to
Ooh,
have in that? Oh yeah, anybody who's worked in Marketo understands. It's like, I think the certification process, like even for a basic level, is like $250 per test, like to try. And so I'm like, okay, what kind of support can you give me? Are you willing to give me this stuff? And his response as a manager was, figure it out, Google it. And so
wow.
I'm like, okay, if you feel so strongly that this is part of my job and that I need to do this and this is the system that we're working in, um, I need to get paid for training. I need paid for the certification for that. And you have to understand we have to shuffle some of these other things that I'm running because I'm literally running like a ton of campaigns. I'm also doing analytics here. I'm checking things on website. I'm doing ABM marketing. I'm not just doing email marketing. I'm not doing the one thing. I'm running a gambit of different things. So we have to figure out a balance. So having those conversations with your manager up front to say, okay, what other things can I take off my plate if this is something that I want to do that I know may advance my career later on. I did get the certification, and it did help a lot. But I also made a lot of mistakes in that system because I didn't have that support system in place. Luckily, a lot of my mistakes end up turning out to be good things for the company, um, and led to successful demand generation campaigns through email. But it wasn't. But I still had to be humble enough to sit there and say I made a mistake, and this was my fault. And I couldn't blame it on not having training. I was like, I made some assumptions. I tried. I Googled it, and this is what happened. The other thing that I would recommend is, like I said, talking to them and say, is this really going to help my career? Is this really what I think is going to help me overall in my career? Especially when people are starting out, they don't know. So of course they're going to jump on it and say, okay, yes, I want that certification just so I can keep my job. Or maybe it'll help me get a promotion within the company as a content marketer. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So you have to sit there and say, okay, where's the balance? Where's the balance for my home life, my career? Is it worth the investment to do that? There's other times where I said, no, I can't do that.
Yeah. And I
It's
think
not
it
going to work for
depends.
me.
I think
Yeah.
it also depends too on what kind of certification. Because
Mm-hmm.
in my scenario, it was very dry, memorizing rules, like rule names, numbers, dates, times,
Oh,
all that
yeah.
kind of stuff that I know I'm not good at all.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't going to be the ability to do any of this during work hours. So it
Oh,
was a
yeah.
hard pass for me
Yeah.
because I
And
already had a full plate.
yeah, and you have to learn how to set healthy boundaries, and it's good to start doing that early in your career. To sit there and really do a self-evaluation. If you want to put the time and energy into it, and you're excited about it, absolutely. I know for me, I went back. I have a degree in broadcast journalism, and I went back to school to get an associate's degree in web design and development because I wanted more out of my career than what I currently had as an administrative assistant in marketing. I
Yeah.
wanted to be more. So if you think there's value behind it, that's great. But if it's memorizing stuff that you're not good at, I'm horrible at accounting. I'm just going to let you know. I'm dyslexic, so spreadsheets are questionable for me. It's like I had to sit there and say, okay, is it worth the time and energy for me to do this? And sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no. So just ask yourself those hard questions and have those hard conversations up front.
Totally.
And ask, do we have if you don't want to review this, do we have the budget to have somebody else outside of us to do it? Or maybe this is where AI comes into play, where you check it through Grammarly. Are they having issues because there's a subject matter expert and they want to go way in the weeds of it? Or do they just not want to read through a long document? That's fine. We can have, you can use AI tools now to go through and check the basic grammar, make sure it goes with your brand guidelines, and then have somebody else check it. And if that person absolutely does not want to check that work or want to produce it, then find somebody in your organization that does. Because for me, I can't put something out there that I know has not been checked by a product marketer and or legal and or subject matter expert or brand specialist. Because if there's a mistake, someone's going to see it and it's going to be top down. And I don't
Yeah.
want the president of my company knocking on my boss's door, figuratively, because I work remotely, or knocking on my door virtually
Right.
saying, why did this say this? When we know it's against brand guidelines or whatever. And I can't go back and say, John Smith didn't want to look at it, or John Smith was taking 3 or 4 weeks to look at it. So, and we needed to get it out the door. No, that's a reason why you have processes in place and brand guidelines. So if that person doesn't want to do it, see who you can do it
Yeah.
for you.
And I
Mhm.
honestly think you're always better off having someone who was not the content creator do
Mhm.
those kinds of compliance reviews because it is really difficult when you've spent too much time with
Oh yeah,
content you've created to see some of those things.
absolutely. Like I said, I'm very fortunate in the company that I work for now. I have a creative team of 2 fantastic women that check my work for me and check brand stuff to make sure that it's compliant, it's AP guidelines, and they check everything from like white papers to email footers, anything that has our brand and name on it, including like convention, like when we go the booths and stuff like that. I help write information for that, and they check that so it's compliant. So again, I 100% agree, because when you're staring at a white paper for so long, you can get noise blind, or you're looking at a campaign and it's your idea. You can be very passionate about it and sometimes have the blinders on and not see some of the small details. Like, for example, Oxford comma.
Totally.
That can get you in trouble with some organizations. Some people use it, some people don't. So, I mean, it's little things that, like that, as content marketers, we can get so hung up on. Whereas in regulated industries, legal team and product marketers can get hung up on the verbiage used or the statements used, and we're too busy focused on if there's a comma or semicolon, or does it have a trademark or the regulation or the copyright symbol next to it. And so it's always good to make sure that you have, multiple people checking that work.
Totally.
Yeah,
Totally
absolutely.
agree. Before we move on, we did get a question from one of our viewers, Todd Jones,
Mhm.
asking, is content marketing really valued in regulated industries? And I'll let you expand on it too, but I'll tell you from my experience, Todd, at Schwab, it was actually a huge differentiator because we did so much investor education
Mm.
because it was kind of built into the values that we had as a company, which was making everyone, bringing investing to everybody, democratizing investing. So content marketing was something we had a whole team of people creating investor education content for the entire time I was there. So at least, I can't speak for every organization, but I know both in both of my highly regulated industry experiences, definitely was.
Absolutely. I've worked in construction as well, and like heavily government, and just even internal communications for employee communications. It was valued so much that they created a whole knowledge center around just educating people on the tech and the product and the services that they had within that organization. And they had a lot of government contracts and that sort of thing. I've worked as a freelancer and a contractor for like election software kind of systems, and just even doing tech manuals for that. It's not like necessarily content marketing per se, but even when you're doing technical writing and educating, a lot of these industries really look at that fine print and look at that to educate their own internal employees as well as external facing people. And so for me, absolutely, I think it depends on the company. It depends on the size of your team too, because sometimes I've been where I am the whole content marketing team on some of these organizations. And how do I value it, Todd? What do I put the information out there? What do I feel is important? And then working with those subject matter experts to make sure it gets out. In the veterinary care services, it was a cornerstone of what we did, educating pet parents on the importance of vaccinations, of rabies, of basic health care, for your pet, licensing and that sort of thing, because there are huge fines depending on what county you live in the United States, or where you can get fined like $200, $300, and they'll go knocking on your door to door. And a lot of the communities that we served were in these like rural communities or lower income urban communities where people literally couldn't afford to do this. So we were offering them and educating them about services that they could provide for their pet and still be able to afford all the other necessities they needed. And so for me, that's very important. And right now, working in the payments and finances industry, talking about like AI, ethical AI, humanizing and networking and cybersecurity and all of these concerns that people have, where are they going to get their information from? Who are they going to get their information from? So it's important to sit there and say, what is the information that we're putting out? Is it accurate? Is it timely? How are we connecting to our audiences? So I think, yes, it depends on your executive leadership. It depends on the organization. It depends on the size. And it depends on your commitment as well. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about it. On making sure education is one of the biggest things. I'm not here to sell anybody on anything as a content marketer. A little bit, you know what I'm saying? Like a little bit. But my job is more to educate people on what we do and why it's important. And I think once you humanitize it and explain it to them in terms that they understand and in the language that they understand, in the industry terms they use, they're going to be much more receptive to that versus you sitting there just saying, okay, I think this is what they mean.
And I think that's important because, again, if you want to do more than just create the same content your organization has been creating since its inception, or
Mm.
only doing, the same content, that everyone else is doing,
Mm.
you do need to figure out how are you going to, build the trust with your executive team and get their buy-in. So I'd love it if you could share some of the strategies that you've deployed to build that trust and to show that it will be beneficial to the company's eventual bottom line to try something that's creative and out of the box that you know that maybe people are a little afraid of, because I know these highly regulated industries have a tendency to be risk adverse because nobody wants to get a fine.
Absolutely. For me, I think the most important thing about developing relationships in your company or in your organization, or if you're coming in as a freelancer or a contractor, is setting up initial meetings with people who are, one, find out, getting a list of who your stakeholders are for that campaign or for that market, whatever you're producing content for. Who's the one that's going to do the final sign off on it? Is it legal? Is it regulatory? Is it executive leadership? Whose names are going to be attached to that, or product marketing? And then what you can do is, if it's a one-on-one, great, set up a one-on-one meeting, have conversations, ask questions. Why are we doing this? Who is our audience? What do you want them to do? What actions do you want them to take? Because for example, in the payments industry, our sales cycle, as you know, can be like 18 to 24 months. So I may generate a lead like in 2023, but the company won't actually see results until the end of 2024, early 2025. So it's, again, is what are we trying to achieve here? And what is our actual timelines? Because, and then that's where content strategy comes into play, and to sit there and say, okay, how long does it actually take me to produce a piece of content from start to finish, with legal approval, regulatory approval, and that sort of thing? And depending on what it is, it can be anywhere from, it can take anywhere between, 6 weeks to 6 months, depending on what it is and who has the buy-in. Are we doing a case study where we have to work closely with a partner or a client to get that information produced? Is it a huge report, like where we literally are pulling together a 50 to 60 page report with lots of data points that are global throughout the world, and we're doing charts, and we're getting executive leadership to do an intro into it, and having descriptions and doing social campaigns around it? It's like, who is giving me this information? And having those kickoff calls, having those planning meetings, talking to them and saying, okay, realistically, this is what I can do within 2 weeks, 90 days, 6 months, or 1 year. Because you have to have that open dialogue and that open conversation to get people on board. And you have to have a clear definition from whoever's running the campaign to produce content for that campaign. Like, I lean heavily on my product marketers and my subject matter experts to say, okay, what topics are we doing for those blogs? What emails do you need? How often are you going to conferences? Will you need handouts for those conferences? What are we saying on the booths behind the scenes? So again, it depends on all the working parts and pieces and having those conversations. And then luckily I have like a whole product, like a project tracking system. I'm telling you, project management is key with any of these things. To sit there and say, what are our deadlines? Showing them the Gantt chart, saying, hey, if you're 2 weeks behind getting me approvals for this, that's going to put it's going to push the deadline out by 2 or 3 weeks. And I think once you show them the visualization and the work and the process that goes behind the scenes, then people start to get those aha moments to say, okay, I get it. I get it. Because as content marketers, people come to us and they don't realize how long an email actually takes to write, produce, and get approved. They think, oh, I can get it done in 24 hours. I can get something turned around. Yes, I can. But what else are we going to bump to make sure that email gets out? So it's, again, making sure you have clear communications, content calendars, knowing who your subject matter experts are, and having those conversations up front on what your products and solutions are. Get into your website, get into your knowledge library, set up separate meetings with people on your calendar to sit there and talk about, what is this product? What does it do? What do we want our audience to walk away with? You don't have to be a huge subject matter in one specific thing. I'm a jack of all trades. I know a lot of stuff, but if you want to get into the weeds or the technical on how it actually works, I'm going to point you to somebody else. But it takes time too. When you're first starting a job or first starting a project, you're not going to be, like you said, you're not going to be the subject matter expert on knowing the numbers behind it or why it works or how it works or why we're marketing this particular thing. That's why you want to start talking to people. It takes time. It takes a lot of time. Like in my current role, it's taken me almost 2 years to walk the walk and talk the talk and to understand why we do what we do. So I can effectively write emails, social campaigns, email footers. If I'm reading through a blog, I can pick up on those subtle cues and say, I don't think this is what we're looking for. Let's change it to this. But I cannot rely on my own knowledge alone. And I can't rely on AI like like Grammarly or Copilot or some of these other ones, these tools that make it easy for me, yes, to produce content. But then I have to turn around and make sure, again, it hits our brand guidelines and it hits what we're trying to say in the audience we're trying to target. Because the AI only knows what the AI knows. And it doesn't know my brand guidelines. And it doesn't know the tone that my speaker's trying to get. And it doesn't know the PowerPoints and all the visuals that we need to put in there. It can just help me produce the content. And so I think we can use these tools, but we also need humans to guide it and look at it and, again, do the oversight to say, what is it we're trying to say here? So a lot of the times you'll get people in our industry or like regulated industries to say, oh, just use this. Our competitors say this, or just, Copilot cranked out this, so let's just use this. No. We have to make sure it sounds like us. It sounds like you. It sounds like my president. It sounds like it's coming from us. And it's not just generic speak, because people are going to pick up on that. And that's when you're going to start losing your audience.
Totally agreed. Now, in most B2B content marketing, and even in B2C, when people are trying to figure out, what really engages our community, what do they need more of, how can we differentiate? Typically, you go out and you ask them. You'll do either a lot of one-on-one interviews, or you'll do a reader survey.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that stuff is not available to you when you're marketing in highly regulated industries. So, what do you do? What do you use as the surrogate for having that direct consumer feedback?
I'm fortunate enough to work in an industry where there's a lot of conferences that go on. And so we have product marketers who go to conferences, subject matter experts, sales representatives who go to these different conferences in these different industries and come back with, they asked us this, they're talking about this, they're looking for this. So we can actually get quote unquote boots on the ground information directly from our subject matter experts and that sort of thing, which helps. There's also surveys that you can send out to like clients, your current clients and current customers, sitting there saying, okay, what is this, and what is that? LinkedIn has polls. You can put it out on your corporate channels. Hey, we're noticing these trends. What are you most interested about? Like, for example, just on my personal LinkedIn, I said, hey, are you worried that AI is coming for your job? Yes, no, not even thinking about it right now. Too much going on. And just doing an informal poll like that to sit there and say, okay, what is my audience caring about? Where can I create content around that subject based on that feedback? 5 people may answer you, or you may get 2 comments, because not everything's going to go viral, but at least that can kickstart that creative process within you and your team to sit there and say, okay, at least people are engaging me on this question or this topic. Let's start looking at it. Let's start doing some research into it. Maybe this can be an untapped market or an untapped question that we can build a guide page around, an infographic around, a vlog, a video blog, maybe interview our subject matter expert for YouTube. It doesn't have to necessarily be a huge campaign around one topic. It can be, oh, this is a hot topic trending on LinkedIn. Let's get a comment from our subject matter expert to go on LinkedIn on their personal LinkedIn chat and say something about it. And of course, run it past legal. But at least, I have a list of subject matter experts that I can go to that sit there and say, okay, I know these are trending on LinkedIn. These are hot topics. People are obviously commenting on it. It's industry related. Let's make sure we're presenting ourselves as subject matter experts in that space. And I can reach out to them and say, hey, do you want to comment on this?
Yep.
Yes or no? And I loop in, of course, we have a fantastic social media marketing digital marketer on our team. And I make sure she's aware of that as well. So you always want to loop in. You get a great idea as a content marketer. Always loop in who your stakeholders are, whether it's your social marketing team, other copywriters, your content strategist, other digital marketers, your boss. You want to make sure that when you're tossing ideas over the fence, the people who need to be aware of it or maybe adding extra work on their plate are also aware of it, so they can give their feedback to say, okay, this will fit in our calendar. That's a great idea. Maybe we need to do a LinkedIn article, and then we can run from there. And other times I've tossed ideas over the fence and they're like, nope. I'm like, okay. And you just keep going, you just keep going. Not every idea that you're going to pitch is going to be successful or engaging. You may think it's a great idea. You put it out there. You think this is going to get a great response, and the campaign just fizzles out. And what do? You come back to your team. You sit there and do a post-campaign wrap-up, and you say, okay, this didn't perform as well as what we thought. Where can we shift either the paid search money for LinkedIn ads or paid search? Or where do we need to shift? Maybe it's a lack of information. Maybe we need a guide page. Maybe we need some subject matter experts, or maybe the content was too dry and too quote unquote boring and not engaging enough, or didn't address the right region. Maybe that region is facing something else. Let's get together and figure it out. Because nothing's worse than course correcting at the end of the year.
Totally.
And waiting to the end of the year to go back and look at 365 days and go, oh, we should have changed course mid-year. It's always good to have, like with my teams, I do once a month check-ins. And then of course we have 3-month, 90-day check-ins for overall strategy. What's moved, what's prioritizing, what do we need to put on the back burner? What's fizzling, what's not. And then, kind of go from there, because our markets constantly change, even in heavily regulated industries. What people are talking about, what people are engaging with is constantly changing, like consumer demand. So we have to make sure we're staying on top of those curves or top of those topics, but also making sure that it's still compliant, which is the trick.
Yeah. I really found our customer advisory boards to be helpful for that, because although we only, got out there to see them in person maybe once a year, we did quarterly calls with them. And it was such a great time to just share, here's all the content, that we're planning, what are we missing? What should we make sure that we cover? And which of these things would you absolutely never in a million years read or listen to? And so, if you have those kinds of groups within your organization, use them as a sounding board even before you're pitching whoever has to approve them, because they'll frequently have a really good take. And if they're bored about an idea, then don't even try to tee it up. But on the flip side, if there's something that they are really excited about, then if you do pitch it and you get kind of a lukewarm response, it's not just you pitching it, it's you also saying, well, there was this really lively conversation between these two folks, about it. And here are the points they brought up, so that you're not just pitching an idea with what you think will resonate. You're pitching an actual conversation that you were a part of. And I think that can make a huge difference too.
Absolutely, Erika. And I always say, ask yourself this as a content writer and producer, as well as to your subject matter experts and product marketers, whoever your team is that you're working with, whether you're a freelancer, a contractor, direct employee, part of the team, ask them, would you read this? If they write it, just ask them, pause. Would you read this? Because people have, thanks to social media, thanks to, the way things roll nowadays, in digital marketing, as you know, people's attention spans have been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And I think the average is like 5 seconds, 3 seconds to get people's attention now, with headlines, and then put the information underneath it. And you have to have the who, what, when, where as condensed as possible in the first couple of sentences or bullet points. Otherwise, people aren't going to pay attention. So the first question I ask them is, are you going to read this? And if I get like dead air or no response, or, oh, I never thought about it that way, that's also a great conversation as a content producer, content marketer, to ask them, to kickstart those conversations, to sit there and say, Would you read this? Would you look at this? And when I worked in veterinary services, I was very blessed to have a whole veterinary council of veterinarians across the United States that got to weigh in on topics that they were seeing in their local clinics and in their regions. What was important to them? And some of them, it was like rattlesnake prevention. Other, it was like mosquitoes and fleas and ticks. Other, it was like, hot temperatures,
Yeah.
how to prepare for emergencies. And so it's important to sit there and say, okay, if I don't have a council or I don't have a customer marketing people that I can, lean into, or customer feedback directly coming in, let's ask those hard questions as a team to sit there and say, okay, would you read, boss, would you read this? Or, take it outside of your team, outside of digital marketing. Take it to somebody who's in, outside of legal, outside of that, you said, constantly read and see these things. Take them to IT, take them to, somebody outside of the marketing team and say, would you read this? Would you interact with this? Does this make sense? Do you understand what we're asking you to do and or this information? And get that feedback. And I found when I've done that, it's very valuable feedback. Like, oh, I didn't even know we could do that. I didn't know what this meant that. Oh, really? You mean this? Yeah. And so it's good to see that, or I had no idea. You lost me within like 4 sentences. Is there a chart or something that, you can explain this, or a visual that we can break it down? And sometimes, like I said, if you don't have outside people that can help you, try inside your community, just different departments, and see where that cross collaboration can come for some great creative ideas. You'd be surprised on what people can come back with.
Totally. So before we kind of delve into some examples and see if folks have any questions,
Mhm.
I'd love to hear though, how do you keep up on like the ever changing, legal and regulatory um, concerns that affect what you can and can't write about, or what kinds of content you can or can't create, because it is changing all the time. So in
Oh
addition to
yeah.
having to think about things from the standpoint of, hey, how are all of these channels and their algorithms changing, or how is the
Mhm.
software I use to get my job done changing, you also have to keep all of that in mind. So I'd love to hear your tips for how to stay current on all of that and not just rely upon your compliance and legal team telling you what you can or can't do, which is probably going to be a lot more narrow than you would like.
Absolutely. Well, I work with a lot of product marketers who really, and are subject matter experts, because I'm in the finance industry right now, and payments and digital payments, and regulations are constantly changing depending on, especially when you're talking about real time payments, which can be super dry when you're talking about like finance and businesses and statistics and um, regulations and compliance, the Federal Reserve, when you're starting to talk about stuff like that. So the way it makes it easy for me is I reach out to them, I talk about them, and I say, okay, I'm seeing online that this, and I set up Google alerts too, which really are helpful, saying this is what's going on in the EU, this is what's going on in the United States, and with keywords like payments, digital payments, alternative payments, payments regulation, and that sort of thing. So that way I can get notices when things start to come up on trends. I also keep my eye on LinkedIn a lot, like on what's trending on the side of the LinkedIn that come through, because a lot of that is like they talk about new EU regulations. It talks about what's happening in the merchant and retail space. It's talking about bankruptcies. It's talking about biller stuff. It's talking about healthcare breaches and cybersecurity. And so I look at that also because that gives me an indication of where my industry is going. So definitely, it never hurts to set up Google alerts. Keep your eye on, all the social medias, like your Twitters, your LinkedIn, kind of see what, and your hashtags, the trending hashtags that you're seeing. Because sometimes what I do is my little cheat code is I go into LinkedIn and I hashtag like real-time payments. I hashtag alternative payments. I hashtag AI, generative AI, cybersecurity, healthcare. I want to see what people are talking about, not just with my company and my competitors, but what are other people in my industry talking about? Also, I belong to a lot of content creation groups on LinkedIn to see what they're talking about. How are they facing their challenges? Because it's not always just about my industry. It's what's happening as in our industry as producers as well. So it's important to not only check in there, but also touch base and see, okay, what's happening within what we do as digital marketers, as content producers.
Totally. So I always like when we're kind of wrapping up these conversations to hear from my guests,
Mhm,
what some really, to them exceptional examples are of people doing work in their space. So, the examples I always give are, Schwab, I think, has always done such a great job of content marketing that really helps people become that informed investor.
mhm,
And then One Medical is, to me, because I was a One Medical customer for a very long time when I lived in the Bay Area.
mhm,
They had such um, a great approach to creating super relevant content, that's, you're like, wow, this is actually coming from a doctor's office, because it was, very human and very patient centric and
mhm,
very real. So I always really loved that, whether it was their podcast or their blog. So I'd love to hear
mhm.
some examples from you of some of the highly regulated content that breaks that dry, boring mold.
Oh, okay. Top of the mind for me, I know not to promote my own company that I work for, but ACI Worldwide is a global payments organization, and we do great work there because I'm blessed to work with a lot of great, creative, smart people who know their industry very, very well. And so we've had the opportunity to use like videos, infographics, um, and just explore what AI can do for us using Canva to be able to produce templates to make it easier for our product marketers to go in and create social media graphics and stuff like that. So I'm very excited about what we're doing there, especially with our prime time for real time report that we just produced, because we're producing video. It's a 51-page report that we're doing videos for, paid social for, social marketing, and we're really diving into specific countries and seeing how those countries are using real-time payments. But it's not boring. We're not just slapping a bunch of stats at you, or shooting a bunch of stuff at you. We're saying, how is this actually impacting people's lives? So that's what I love about that. I did bring a visual of something that I did a long time ago, if you want to see, that's creative in the tech
Yeah,
space.
that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Okay. So let me see. You need an IT mix that's flexible, okay? Because this was dealing with like the cloud, SaaS space, and that sort of thing. And I worked with an agency, and this was a direct marketing piece. We actually mailed these out to people, okay? And remember those little Flex Armstrong guys from back in the early 80s where you can stretch them and stretch them until they broke? Yeah, we sent this out to a couple hundred people. And then we had a little marketing campaign about stretching your cloud and stretching your budgets and working with limited resources. So you can be, and I worked with an agency to get that produced on a limited budget, but you can be creative. It's working with your subject matter experts and agencies to sit there and say, okay, where can we have fun here? That I know that, because most people, if I give them something, they're just going to throw it away. But with a little stretchy guy, it's a stress ball and you can put it on your desk and it's going to get something to get you to laugh and something that's going to get you to remember our name.
Super.
Um, Absolutely. And another campaign that we ran was for HPE, and it was all around chemistry. And I sent out bright yellow boxes with red lens glasses in it, right? So you had to look at the use your red glasses and put them on to read the secret code message to enter to win an Amazon gift card. And then what we did was we also produced socks, bright yellow socks with our logo and HPE logo on it, and handed them out at a healthcare conference. And they went over like gangbusters. Everybody loved them. Socks, who knew? So again, you
Well,
can have
folks
fun with
had
your
their moment. They
yeah.
definitely did.
Socks have their moment. So what I'm saying is you can be creative with your messaging, whether it's social media and pulling out specific stats from reports and trying to do vlogs with it, interviews with it, on YouTube, infographics. It doesn't have to be boring. You can have fun with these things and these campaigns. It's just sitting down and really talking through the process and pitching it to people and seeing if it would be a hit with your audience. Out there in the real world, out there in the real world, other campaigns that I've seen have gone great is what Stripe does on their LinkedIn information and that sort of thing in the payments and financial industry. And I love and this is I don't know, it's not necessarily in the regulation, highly regulated campaigns, but Savage Fenty, what Rihanna has been doing with her product line, launching and getting, consumer information, and Lizzo's brand line on how she's doing more size inclusive to hit her target market and how she's producing that and how she's having fun with that. Again, just because we're digital marketers, we have to know who our audience is and what's going to click with them. And those companies do extremely targeted campaigns, produce excitement, are creative around it, and then develop a loyal following. So how do we do that in heavily regulated industries? We try to have fun, but we don't sacrifice the overall message to have fun and be creative.
That's so important. Definitely. I love that. So we're just about out of time. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're watching this on replay or on YouTube, feel free to leave us any questions you might have over on LinkedIn, because this will be on LinkedIn for a couple of weeks for you to watch. And we'll be happy to answer those questions for you. Anne
Absolutely.
Marie, for folks who want more content from you, where are the best places for them to find you?
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's the last tip I'll leave everybody is, make sure you always constantly update your LinkedIn with the work content that you're producing to let people know the kind of work that you're doing. And so all of my latest voiceover work, content work is all produced there. So check me out. Happy to answer your questions.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest. And everybody, we'll see you again next week for Content Chat. Bye,
Thank you again,
everyone.
Erica. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.